Good evening, friends. Let's continue with The Mighty Miss Malone. We're going to read chapters 27 and 28 today. Chapter 27, The Letter. Mother had warned me time and time again, but I couldn't help it. One day at school, Mr. Smith got tired of teaching and gave us assigned reading time halfway through class. I had another horrible Penrod book on my desk. But I was really reading what was on my lap, The Quest of the Silver Fleece, for the 5th time. You can tell you're reading a really good book when you forget all about everything else, and you know you'll die if you don't get to at least the end of the chapter. That was what Mother had warned me not to do anywhere but home, but Mr. Alums was giving me more and more books that I loved and I couldn't put down, and that can be dangerous. I didn't hear the bell dismissing class. Mr. Smith said, "Well, Deza, I suppose Mr. Tarkington and I should be flattered you're enjoying Penrod so much that you don't want to leave, but I've got to lock up." "I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, I was just—" "No problem. You're a real credit to your race. See you tomorrow." As I walked from school, I still had about 10 pages till the end of the chapter. I did what Mother had warned me not to do, and walked and read at the same time. When I'd looked up, I'd walked 3 blocks past the post office. Maybe I'd just keep walking home. It wouldn't be a big deal if I came next Friday. But I turned around. I didn't stop reading, though. I knew when I finished the book, my hands would shake, my eyes would rim with tears, and I'd say, "A masterpiece, a work of true genius. What a tragedy, a true tragedy, that it had to end." I pushed the post office door open, and everything froze. Mrs. James was holding an envelope over her head and screaming, "Deza! I've been waiting! I think this is it." My book crashed to the floor. I was dumbstruck. She came around the little gate waving the letter. "It was postmarked in Cleveland, and it's to you and your mother." I stared at it. This was what I wanted more than anything else in the world, and now I couldn't move. She put her hand on my shoulder. "Deza, dear, do you want me to open it?" She picked up my book and led me to a chair. I took the envelope. It was written by a typewriter. Mrs. Margaret Malone and Mistress Deza Malone. Care of General Delivery, Flint, Michigan. "Deza, are you all right?" "Oh, yes. I... It's not from my father. It's from my brother." "How can you tell?" "If it was from father, he would have put all 3 of our names on it." I turned it over and over. Is it against the law for me to open the letter, or should both me and Mother do it? "Your name is on it, so you can open it." She smiled and patted my hand. "Besides, Miss Malone, I bet it's an absolute impossibility for you to walk all the way home and get there with that envelope still sealed." Father would have been proud of the Flint-style way I ripped the envelope open. Mrs. James picked up the pieces and said, "Dear me, Deza, I know you're excited, but this is the U.S. mail, sweetheart. You have got to be respectful." I unfolded the page inside. I expected one of Jimmy's terrible drawings, but the letter was typed. He must have got someone to do it for him. "Dear Peg and darling daughter Deza." I looked at the first words over and over. It didn't make sense. Why would Jimmy... Then it hit me this wasn't from Jimmy. It had to be from Father. I stopped breathing and had to read each sentence twice before I could understand it. It was from Father. "I have missed you two so much. Every day has been a heartache for me. Don't worry, I'm fine. I have asked a friend to type this since I hurt my right hand in an accident. It is not very serious. I am able to work, but I still can't hold a pen properly. The doctor told me it will take maybe a year before I am completely healed. Now for the great news. I have found work as a traveling carpenter. I make good money and travel all over the country. I will send money every 2 weeks. We will be able to rent a house in Gary before much longer. I hope this finds you well and in great spirits. Love, Father. I read it again and again. The 4th time through, I had to stop. Tears were clouding my eyes so much that I couldn't see. Mrs. James said, "Oh, please tell me it's good news, Deza." "Oh, Mrs. James, Father's okay. He got a job. He's working as a carpenter." We fell into each other's arms. "Child, I am so happy for you." She handed me something that had fallen out of the envelope when I ripped it apart. It was a piece of paper that had been folded and taped shut. Out fluttered 2 of the greenest, brightest, cleanest looking dollar bills I'd ever seen. I picked up the money. They weren't dollar bills, they were $5 bills. I had never seen this much money in all of my life. "Oh my, Deza, in the future you must treat the mail with more care. Look at this." "Are those real?" She took the bills. I went into the wrong profession. I should have become a carpenter. I hugged her again, put Father's letter in my book, and flew home. I couldn't wait to see how flabbergasted Mother was going to be. As soon as I got home, I started arguing with myself about how to give Mother the good news. It isn't the way of the Malones to come right out and tell anybody anything, so I had to think of a way to surprise her. Should I pretend I was so sad about something that she'd pull me into her lap and say, "Kisses, kisses, kisses make you stronger," then give her the letter? Should I put the letter under her pillow so the next morning she'd find it like the tooth fairy had visited? The more I thought about it, the more confused I felt. I put on my Hotel Durant blouse and blue gingham jumper. When I climbed on the bed and read the letter for the 5th time, I started crying. I don't know why. I remembered how my tears messed up Clarice's goodbye note. So to be safe, I got up and put the letter in our new filing cabinet under the mattress. I curled back up on the bed. I wished Mother would hurry home. I didn't want to, but I bawled and bawled and bawled. And that's how Mother found me an hour later. I pulled the letter out and handed it to her. She didn't act as excited as I thought she would. She kept looking at the letter to the 2 $5 bills, flashed her 111 lines before she said, "Oh, Deza, isn't this wonderful?" Her heart wasn't in those words. Maybe it was just relief. Maybe you can hold on to something bad for so long that when you put it down, you don't trust the feeling. That had to be why both of us weren't bouncing around the room. "I'm still going to check the post office every day," I said. "Deza, it says he'll write again in 2 weeks. Why don't you start checking closer to then? I'd just die if Father's next letter sat at the post office 1 day longer than it had to." She smiled. "Fine, but leave the library 15 minutes early and come right home after." That night, I thought I'd have trouble sleeping, but when Mother kissed me and said goodnight, my darling, the last thing I remember thinking was 2 weeks. 2 long, slow weeks. Then I know something good is going to happen. I had just left the library when a man called out, "Miss Jones?" I kept walking. He yelled again, "Miss Jones?" There was no one around me. I could hear him coming nearer. I closed my book and started walking faster. The man started running at me. I looked for help, but I was on a block of vacant lots and empty homes. "Wait, Miss Jones, hold on for a minute." I turned around and did what my mother and father always told me to do if something like this happens. I yelled at the top of my lungs, "My name is not Jones! Leave me alone! Someone help me! This man is bothering me!" I took in a breath to keep yelling, but the man stopped and put both his hands up. "Whoa, whoa, it's me, Sawbonesy. Don't you remember from the camp? The harmonica man? I'm sorry, Missy. I mistook you for Jimmy's sister." "Mr. Z, you scared me to death." He laughed. I thought that was you. How are you and your ma? Do you know where Jimmy is? Is he here with you? Y'all ain't heard? Oh, please, Mr. Z. If it's bad news, just tell me. Bad news? Your brother's doing real good. I thought for sure he was writing to y'all. Must have got lost in the mail. Please, Mr. Z, what happened to Jimmy? He's doing just grand. He's singing in nightclubs. What? It's like I told y'all. If there was anybody who could squeeze a penny or two out of folks in these hard times, it would be him and that voice. You aren't traveling with him? He's all alone? Well, now, that's sort of a sore subject with me. Jimmy's fell in with a shady manager, calls himself Maxwell. I got cut loose. Do you know where he is? He travels a lot on the Chitlin circuit. But I'm sure that right now he's singing mostly out of Maxwell's nightclub in Detroit. Joint called the New Turned Leaf. What's a nightclub? That's just a fancy name for a blind pig or a speakeasy. I'd heard lots of horrible things about speakeasies. They were where people went to drink alcohol and fight with each other. Mr. Z, can you wait so I can write this down? I'm so excited I'll forget. I got my pencil and opened my notebook. Sir, Jimmy and my last name is Malone, not Jones. He snapped his fingers. I forgot! That Maxwell clown had Jimmy change his name to Jones. What? Why? Who knows? But ask me or anyone in Detroit about Lil Jimmy Jones, and they'll know who you mean. Mr. Sawbuck Z gave me the address of the nightclub in Detroit. Then he said, when you see him, tell him I ain't mad. He done what he had to do. I've been in this business long enough to know what's what. Thank you again, sir, and I'll tell him. I started running home to give Mother the news. 3 things stopped me. First, my heart was pounding so hard and fast, and my legs were so wobbly and weak that it felt like I'd already run a mile. I bent over to catch my breath. The second thing was I could almost hear Mother say, Deza, that's just a rumor. If Jimmy was making money, you know he'd write us. Or if Jimmy was near as Detroit, he would have come to see us. But he hadn't. And the third thing was when I heard my second brain. Okay, kiddo. You know doggone well Mother isn't going to run to Detroit to try to find Jimmy. In a speakeasy? My second brain laughed at me, then added, and you know you don't have half the nerve it would take to even ask her if you could go by yourself. I squeezed down on my back teeth. That second brain was right. I'd never be brave enough to do it on my own. Unless... Lucky for you, we are continuing right now so that we can see what she decided, what she was thinking. Chapter 28, The New Turned Leaf. Mother's favorite saying is, when there's a will, there's a way. And my will was strong enough to find a way to write her a note, borrow money out of the filing cabinet, buy a Greyhound bus ticket, and come to Detroit all by myself. It was 10 o'clock at night, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't in bed asleep. Instead, I was squeezing my pocketbook to my chest, standing behind a tree in Detroit, Michigan. Across the street was the address that Mr. Z said was the New Turned Leaf, a speakeasy, a nightclub. I kept peeking at the house, trying to figure it out. I know you can't read what someone's like by the way they look. The person who seems to be kind and understanding may be using that look to hide something horrible, while the person who at first sight scares you might turn out to be the gentlest soul you'll ever meet. And things like houses hide their secrets even better than people do. Things don't even have to try. My heart sank. Nothing seemed to match up with the horrible rumors I'd always heard about speakeasies. The minute I'd decided I was going to come to Detroit by myself, I had been scared to death about what I'd see once I got to the new-turned leaf. I thought there'd be all sorts of loose grown-ups half-dressed, shouting and fighting. I thought there'd be drunken men laying in the mud next to a pile of people who'd been stabbed or shot or had drunk themselves to death that night. I imagined having to cover my ears to block out the gut-wrenching wails of children who were crying to their mothers or fathers not to spend all the grocery money on whiskey and beer or dice. But if those things were going on in this place, you could have fooled me. This new-turned leaf was about the most unexciting thing I could think of. It looked the same as any other very nice house that rich people live in. The curtains on both floors were drawn and were so thick that if there were lamps on inside, you would never know. The front yard was tidy, with a strip of geraniums growing along the sidewalk. There wasn't even a sign to let you know what this was, only the number 3121 lit up under a porch light. The only thing that made me think this was more than just a regular rich person's home was that in a few minutes, I stood behind a tree. 4 couples and 3 or 4 men by themselves walked through the gate and followed the sidewalk to disappear around the back of the house. The men were all wearing fancy suits and hats and ties. Mr. Marvelous Marvin would have fit right in there. The women were in some of the most beautiful dresses and shoes I had ever seen. A lot of Sunday going to church hats had escaped from their boxes a couple of days early. I was so glad I was wearing my blue gingham jumper. I'd stick out like a roach floating in buttermilk in my other dress. 1 or 2 of the men were walking in that rooster-strutting way that Jimmy and his hoodlum friends did back home in Gary. Everybody nodded or shook hands with the short, thick man, half hidden in shadows, leaning against the side of the house. I got the feeling he wasn't about to let just any old buddy get past him without some kind of trouble, even a scared-looking girl dressed in a very nice blue gingham. The curtains in one of the windows came apart, and a triangle of light shone through the darkness. A tiny head, it looked like a 5 or 6-year-old's, was at the base of the triangle of light, and a pair of eyes locked right on me. She must have been watching me as long as I'd been watching the house. She'd raised her hand to wave, then jerked her head around to look back into the room. The curtains fell and smothered the light. I started walking to the corner so I could circle around the house, but hadn't gone 5 steps before my second brain started filling my head with its usual nonsense. Well, kiddo, what if that child is a prisoner in the speakeasy? What if the little girl was getting ready to signal you to call the police when one of the murderers or drinkers or thieves or gamblers who were holding her prisoner came back into the room to make sure she hadn't escaped? What then? Concentrate, Deza. I kept walking toward the corner. My heart started pounding once I turned down the alley. Maybe Jimmy wasn't here after all. Maybe he was traveling, and maybe I should give up and go back to Flint. I kept walking past the speakeasy, cutting my eyes at it so if somebody was watching, they'd think I was just a girl walking through an alley, not someone looking to find their brother or rescue a little girl who'd been kidnapped by gamblers. Then something made the doubts go away. A door on the side of the house that didn't have any kind of knob on it opened, and a man came out. He only took a few steps, then dropped to his hands and knees. 2 times his back buckled up, and like one of those rodeo horses in the movies, he started throwing up more junk than you'd think a human being could ever have swallowed. And then the best thing was, when he finally got up and started running on his tiptoes toward the front door, I saw that door hadn't closed all the way behind him. Doors without knobs, people coming out to throw up, guards hiding in the shadows, little girls held prisoner upstairs. When you added everything up, this was for sure a speakeasy. I watched the man on tiptoes until he turned the corner. Once he disappeared, I held my breath and slowly walked inside. I put my ear near the crack of the door. No screaming or loud noises. I put my fingers in the door, and pulled it open so I could peek in. My head started spinning, and I don't know if it was from relief or disappointment. There was nothing but a narrow hallway. A bright light bulb hung from a wire, and there was another closed door at the other end. This one had a knob on it. I stepped into the new turned leaf and shut the door behind me. I walked to the second door, and without thinking what might be on the other side, I grabbed the knob, turned it, and pushed at the door. But it didn't budge. I leaned my shoulder into it and pushed really hard. It came open a crack. I put all my weight into the next push, and the heavy door moved far enough for me to stick my head through. For the second time that night, my head started spinning. But this time, it had good reason. And that is the end of chapter 28. We will read 29 tomorrow. And we will finish the book on Thursday. All right. Let's go to the questions. There are 3 extended response questions and 4 multiple choice questions. So not very many questions today. Excuse me. Number 1, how do you know if you're reading a good book? Deza gives you some explanations in the chapters that we read today, telling you how you know you're reading a good book. So it's not asking you for your opinion. It's asking you what Deza said in the book, okay? Make sure you've got a complete sentence. Number 2, who wrote Deza and Mama a letter? A, Jimmy, B, Clarice, C, Mrs. Needham, or D, Papa? 3, what fell out of the envelope at the post office? A, money, B, another letter, or C, a picture? Number 4, who did Deza run into on the street? A, Mr. Z, B, Father, C, Jimmy, or D, a hobo? Number 5, where was Jimmy, supposedly? A, Gary, B, with Father traveling, C, singing at a nightclub in Detroit, or D, lost? 6, why did Deza sneak out to Detroit? Complete sentences. Alrighty. How did Deza get into the clubs? How did Deza get into the clubs? So how did she get into the speakeasy? Give me the details from the story there at the end of the chapter we just read. So how was she able to get into the speakeasy? All right. As a matter of fact, tomorrow we'll not only read chapter 29, but also chapter 30, leaving chapters 31 to 33 for Thursday. I hope you enjoyed today's chapters of The Mighty Miss Malone, and hoping for a happy ending for Deza and the Malone family. Have a great night.